Peace and love to you, family. I greet you all in the name of African centered sovereignty. Then I want to talk about the distinction between politics of expediency and politics that's conveyed within the context of a revolutionary agenda. So I want to make this distinction to try and pierce through the veil of historical amnesia that has plagued the minds of most of our people pertaining to what our struggle for freedom, independence, and liberation has been about from the beginning. Because there's a certain way people's minds have been reconfigured to interpret the present out of context with the past, with the sequence of events to which the present can be properly and accurately understood. Politics of expediency. And what is expediency? Expediency is a state or a quality, of being convenient or practical, despite where what you find convenience or practicality in might possibly be something that is unacceptable, something that is improper, something that is, immoral. So expediency therefore means you do what in the survivalist quantum of living works, despite it being improper or unacceptable or immoral. No, I'm doing this because this works. It serves my survivalist psychology at the moment. You are doing what is expedient. So what you're doing is not right or wrong. It's just expedient. So this is where the revolutionary agenda, through which the cause of our struggle was initially conveyed, was initially gone about. Revolution intending to obliterate, intending to overturn, intending to destroy all the clampings, all institutions, all permeations and permutations of our race enemies, who invaded our existential space. That 360 degrees that revolution is beginning of our struggle that did not begin in South Africa with the with introduction of apartheid, or what some of linguistic groups would call apartheid. It did not begin in 1948. It did not begin in 1910. It did not begin, um, with laws that are, racially discriminatory. But it began with the very first incursion into our lands, into our minds, of our invading, race enemies. The resistance, against invasion marked the beginning of what we gear ourselves up for as a revolutionary cause, that that our existential space has been invaded, and there are clampings that unjustly impose limitations on how we should have our sane, productive, meaningful procession to life as natives, as the indigenous people of this land. Now, we fought. Frontier wars were fought, interior wars were fought, as our race enemies, the Dutch, the British, moved, inward, into the interior, of our land. And our communities, our nations, and the kingdoms got defeated through the superior gunpowder that our race enemies used. And our race enemies, who themselves eventually, got to be at loggerheads over the spoils of war. The Dutch, who later on came to be known as Afrikaners, which is a misnomer, engaged in a hefty struggle with our other race enemies, the British, over the spoils of war, of invasion that, both European groups, waged on our ancestors. And they established, after dozens and dozens and dozens of many of our ancestors were brutally, murdered by these brutes, then these two invader groups established republics that were independent of each other. And you had two Boer republics established by the people of Dutch descent, and that was the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. And then you had two polities that were established by the British, and that was Cape Colony and Natal. Now, all these polities are polities that our race enemies and invaders established on our land. Established on our land and maligned, our existence, dislocated us, spatially, and also fostered a menticidal program of ensuring that we will not be in a position to, with clarity, figure what had happened in order to properly understand what is happening. So they themselves continued, that is our race enemies, continued, to bump heads, because each group, and that is, the people of Dutch descent and the British, wanted to claim the whole, stake, wanted to have, power over the whole land stake. And then they reached a deadlock, in their wars, these intra-European wars, which were also fought on the invaded land by Europeans themselves, Europeans among themselves, and they decided to make truce through, Britain's mediation, that resulted in the promulgation, passed by the British Parliament in 1909 of the South Africa Act, which is a piece of legislation that what came to be known as the Republic of South Africa, the union government, the union between the British, invaders and the Dutch invaders, became a creature of a statute that the union government, which was established in 1910, where both, invader groups had to abide with in the truce, that they made. Now, this piece of, legislation was promulgated by the British Parliament in 1909, and in 1910, they established, a union government, and all these independent republics that they established disbanded. They disbanded them and had all of them dissolve into a unitary polity, which strangely our people recognize, to this day as their state, which is not our state. It's a polity that was imposed on this land by people who had already invaded it. So as a mechanism through which, they organize themselves to assert their political existence to statehood and have it legitimized. So, and these are thieves, these are robbers, these are murderers, these are invaders. And they operated the state that they established in 1910 with impunity. It bore no, undesirable political consequences for them, and mind you, they do all these things. They establish this state amidst the presence of people they invaded. And to rub salt to the wound, they instituted a legal system that ensured that these people remain, I don't want to use the word marginalized, because at the crux of our problem as a race, marginalization has got nothing whatsoever to do with that, because we are an invaded people. We are not marginalized, because when you say we are marginalized, it means you legitimize the space, the avenue that is populated, inhabited, controlled, ran by these invaders, by these robbers, by these murderers. And now the presupposition becomes you were supposed to be in it, so you are marginalized from it. So marginalization is an improper nomenclature to use in decrying the injustices that have been leveled against us, that have been meted out on us. So ours is invasion. We were, invaded, robbed, murdered, through the many blood-soaked, imposed systems that have us now continue, to live our lives as natives with grave dissonance that breeds, ignorance. Now came 1948, then the ruling party, because now the state that these two European groups, who invaded our land established, followed the democratic process, and they had 5-yearly elections. And the natives, our ancestors are not part of any of these processes. So now it happened that in 1948, elections were won by the Nationalist Party, which was a pro people of Dutch descent. And then apartheid system was established. That was not the first nightmare that was ever unleashed on the natives, but it's just what one of the political parties that took power in 98 called their system. So wars of resistance, were still being fomented by our warriors, our ancestors who were warriors, who were frontline warriors, at the time. There were many rebellions thwarted by this system, this imposed system. And history, through its passage, saw the emergence of political parties. The natives started organizing themselves into political parties. Hence, the formation of South African National Native Congress, which later on, changed, its name to African National Congress, the ANC. The political direction that started to be the one with signposts into our struggle caused a shift from a revolutionary, agenda to politics of expediency. We want you to include us in a political governing system that you have established. It was no longer about the struggle to wage war to obliterate those who have unjustly invaded and occupied our existential space, land and its resources, and who have arrogantly imposed themselves into our lives as mothers and fathers of knowledge. Our people had a religion that was blood-soaked into their minds, and souls, called Christianity. And many menticidal programs that made them develop self-hate, negative self-image, the very people who brutalized them, our ancestors were made to find intimacy in embracing them or looking, up to them as standards of normal or existence, at its apex. We want to be like them. We want to be equal with them. Then the very people who raped, murdered, brutalized our ancestors, got miseducated in the process into seeing them as a yardstick by which equality is measured. This is where the resistance struggle experiences a paradigm shift from a war that was necessitated by history to be waged on these illegitimate occupiers of our land, these scoundrels who invaded our land, raped, our ancestors, and subjected them to social degradation, economic exploitation, and political oppression, using the superior gun power. Having all these traumas, being blood-soaked into our people's minds, the debilitation that our ancestors suffered was of them ending up seeing them as people who, as a natural, consequence of life's progression, are superior, are supreme, and should be emulated. And if there's anything that we have to engage in a struggle, against, is their exclusion of us. Can we imagine a person comes into your house, rapes every woman in the house, kills every man in the house, and leaves a few, to form part of the spoils, so that he can enslave, degrade, oppress, then dislocates the ones that he has left, places them somewhere, and they organize themselves wherever they are politically and begin to petition this robber who is now occupying the house, fighting or demanding that he includes them in that house and how it is ran. Now, this is where expediency crept into the minds of people prepared for it, the minds which were blood-soaked to complicity, the minds which were debilitated to acquiesce to this kind of indignity that got to be normalized. So is where the struggle changed the gear from revolution to transformation. This is a new nomenclature now creeps in. Transformation, then we fight for democracy. Now it's politics of expediency, cornered to what seemed to make wars of resistance to obliterate the scoundrels that occupied, our land and their institutions. Untenable. It's an element of a defeated society that started developing in our people. The term revolution just became a rhetoric. So, South Africa is approaching so-called democratic elections to vote for a political party that will be the new government. So now, this is all part of politics of expediency that swayed deceptively and deceitfully so our people from the warrior posture of fighting to have their sovereignty reestablished after they had reconquered their land from the invaders and their descendants. Now, politics of expediency, I explained earlier on, politics within the context of the existential quantum of survival. It is expedient for you to do what you do, to go vote every 5 years. It is not right or wrong. Because expediency simply means you are doing what is convenient or practical, despite it, possibly being improper. So, but in this case, thinking that by voting a particular political party to run this Anglo-Boer, this Anglo-Dutch state that was never obliterated, that was never disbanded in 1994 because of the compromising sellout settlement that the ANC reached with the white ruling racist national party to say, let's rather shift the gear from revolution to reformism. Revolutionary politics, got supplanted by politics of reformism. We don't destroy your system. We don't liquidate your state. That is the Anglo-Boer state called the Republic of South Africa or National Government of South Africa, which is not the state of the natives of this land. Well, you have been made to think it is your state. They co-opted you into being citizens of the state that they established on your soil after they had invaded it. You have not had an occasion to defeat them, to oust them, reclaim your land, reconquer your land, and re-establish your sovereignty on it. So I'm saying your participation in the so-called electoral democracy in 5 yearly elections, elections, 5 yearly elections that you go vote, in, I'm reminding you that you are simply doing what is expedient. It is expedient. It's what you do calculating within, your survival mathematics. It will never bring about true freedom, true independence, and cause you to reascend back to your sovereignty as the natives of this land, because everything now is expressed. Every thought, concept is expressed through the lensing, of, discoloration. You are all South Africans now. 1955, which was a trigger, historical marker for a splinter group from the ANC to develop and eventually form a new political organization called the Pan-Africanist Congress. The adoption by the ANC of the Freedom Charter, 1955 at Kliptown, with the preamble, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white together. And these were telltale signs of a gear shift from a struggle ensconced, in the revolutionary agenda to a discourse for inclusion, which I call politics of expediency. And there will never be any fundamental change to the condition that the natives of this land are in. You can go continue vote, but hoping that continuing voting will bring about fundamental changes to your lives is a mirage you have been hoodwinked, to keep chasing, and will never reach, because a mirage is not reachable. A mirage is not reachable. So this was just a reminder to say, we should not be in too deep, in politics of expediency, that we forget the original liberation struggle discourse and what it was about. Many of our people have been caused to forget all that. They talk about human rights now. Human rights violations, different lobby groups. That is the fragmentation that actually facilitates the deepening of this historical amnesia that will continue to make us people who cannot view the present with clarity and proper analysis. History is a predetermined course of events. History determines destiny. Now, if you afflict a people with historical amnesia, that breeds gross ignorance. You actually take charge and control of shaping their destiny, meaning our destiny will forever be a destiny that is relative to the objectives of those who socially, mentally, biochemically, psychologically take charge to control and manipulate our lives and determine their day-to-day outcomes. So now make the distinction between politics of expediency and the revolutionary agenda, and have no illusions about what you are participating in when you go vote every 5 years. This is politics of expediency you are participating in. And politics of expediency will in no way bring you any genuine, any true liberation and independence. Especially if having your sovereignty as natives, as the indigenous people, re-established as your objective, as your aspiration. Well, if you simply want inclusion, co-optation into what your rapists, robbers, murderers have established, then say so. And stop decrying racism. Stop decrying racial discrimination in whatever form. You know why? You are racially discriminated through laws and practices by people who racially violated you by invading your land, raping, your women, subjecting you to political oppression, passing laws that discriminate you. Discriminatory laws are actually blemishes, and skirmishes of a political organism that got conceived when they landed on their shores and got delivered as a baby when they instituted themselves by institutionalizing the state that you call yours to this day. And proudly South African? No. So I wanted to attempt to remove or help or cause, a spark that would create a brain that would, make you see things without any illusions. And I greet you as I came before you. I greet you all in the name of African-centered sovereignty. Peace.